Well, thank you very much, Paul. And it's great to see everyone here as we play our version of Hollywood Squares. So my name is Mark West, and I helped Paul with editing the best trip for Larry. I've known Larry for a long time, but I first met Larry when I was one of his graduate students at Bowling Green State University back in the early 1980s. So at Paul's request, I've written a short little essay for this particular occasion, and I'm so happy to see Larry on my screen. He's right next to me, and that makes me happy. So here's what I wrote. As we celebrate Larry Friedman for his many lasting contributions to the fields of psychohistory and psychobiography, I am reminded of Erik Erikson's 8 Ages on Man chapter from Childhood and Society. I first read this book in a graduate seminar on culture and personality that I took from Larry while I was earning my PhD in American culture at Bowling Green State University in the early 1980s. I remember Larry leading a discussion of Erikson's ideas about the life cycle as it relates to ego integrity and the road to becoming, quote, a mature adult. I'm not absolutely positive Larry's a mature adult, but he's getting old. In Erikson's model, mature adults who achieve ego integrity are often recognized for their willingness to accept, quote, the responsibility of leadership, end quote, and for their general wisdom. This Lifetime Achievement Award recognizes not just Larry's outstanding scholarship, but also his leadership and his wisdom. Larry's first major publication to the field of psychohistory was The White Savage, Racial Fantasies in the Postbellum South, which came out in 1970 while he was an assistant professor of history at Arizona State University. In The White Savage, he delves into the psychological motivations of the white Southerners who were invested in suppressing African Americans in the initial decades after the Civil War. As he thoroughly documents in the book, some white Southerners projected their own aggressive and libidinal impulses onto African Americans, and this response influenced their racist attitudes toward African Americans. After joining the history department at Bowling Green State University in 1971, Larry published The Inventors of the Promised Land, which I have right here, in 1975, and Gregarious Saints, Self and Community in American Abolitionism, 1830 to 1870, which came out in 1982. In both of these books, Larry combines history and psychology in his analysis of the psychological motivations of the people involved in various social and political movements in 19th century America. Around the same period that Larry was completing Gregarious Saints, he developed a more focused interest in psychological theorists. This interest led him to study psychoanalytic theory at the Menninger Foundation. Larry's experiences at the foundation resulted in him deciding to focus his next book on the history of the Menninger Foundation. In researching and writing the Menninger, the Family and the Clinic, which I have right here, which I helped Larry with a little bit. In 1990, Larry turned his, in researching and writing Menninger, the Family and the Clinic, Larry moved in a new direction in terms of combining history and psychology. Instead of using psychological concepts and theories to help explain the behavior of people from the past, he used his keen skills and insights as an historian to shed light on the evolution of a psychiatric hospital and the family behind it. In the process, he showed how psychological concepts and theories are shaped in part by historical events. After the publication of Menninger, the Family and the Clinic in 1990, Larry turned his attention to Erik Erikson. His work on this project coincided with his move to the history department at Indiana University, where he taught from 1993 to 2009. Taking the same thorough research approach that he did with his Menninger book, Larry spent 10 years traveling between Europe and America, investigating Erikson's life and career. The result of this research is his masterpiece, really, Identity's Architect, which is just a fantastic book, which was published by this rinky-dink press called Harvard University Press in 1999. Toward the end of Identity's Architect, Larry discusses Erikson's role as a public intellectual during the 1960s. Erikson drew on his background in psychology and his work as a public intellectual, and this intrigued Larry. Larry's interest in how psychoanalysts and psychologists sometimes function as public intellectuals is reflected in his most recent book, The Lies of Erich Fromm, Love's Prophet, which Columbia University Press published in 2013. In many ways, Identity's Architect and The Lies of Erich Fromm are sister volumes. In both of these biographies, Larry delves into the social forces that shape these men and discusses the lasting impact of their writing. Shortly after retiring from Indiana University in 2009, Larry moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he founded the Conference on Public Intellectuals. These conferences met annually through 2017. Drawing on his leadership skills, he brought together scholars and activists from around the world to discuss the role that public intellectuals play in shaping social and political movements. Throughout his long career, Larry has made lasting contributions to American history, psychohistory, and psychobiography, but there's more to his career than his long string of impressive publications. As one of Larry's former students, I know that Larry is also a superb teacher. He asks his students hard questions, encourages them to transcend disciplinary boundaries, and insists that they engage in primary research. Like so many others, I have benefited from Larry's impressive scholarship, his excellent mentoring, and most of all, his wisdom. Congratulations, Larry, on getting this well-deserved award.
Okay, thank you. Well, I didn't expect many of you to be here. Scott, Steve, I haven't seen you guys in a long while. Mark and I talk fairly regularly. Paul and I talk very regularly. And rebounding, I have some remarks, but I'm still in rebound to those undeserved comments earlier. Let me just sort of improvise then. Of the books, of course, Erikson was the hardest, the most difficult to write about, all that. And then one day it came in Cambridge, in South St. Trowbridge Street. We were in the fall watching the kids play, which he always did, and watching the leaves fall from the tree. And it all of a sudden clicked on me. I'm supposed to know this guy, that he thought differently than most of us. He thought visually. He never ceased to be the artist he started out as. And that really screwed things up for this book. I didn't get enough of that in. Another thing, of course, is with Erikson, the pursuit of the missing father. Who fathered him? That's the roots of the identity crisis concept. And I don't think he knew. And I don't think very many people at all knew. Do you want me to tell you who it was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'm in Copenhagen at a sort of a informal dinner session with a couple that knew him well when he would visit Copenhagen, often he stayed at their house. And he had died by then. And I think the book was out, and I asked, well, who was the missing father who lived somewhere in Copenhagen? And I narrowed it down in that discussion to two people, both of whom thought visually. And of the two, one was a photographer, which is no surprise given the visual orientation. The other was a porno photographer, which I had no idea about. And during that trip, I gathered as much data on these two obscure people, because one of them was his father. And I took all the data, and he was still alive, still on Trowbridge Street. Mm-hmm. And I showed him pictures of the two candidates and said, Eric, if you'd want to, can you comment on the two, and which do you think was your father? Yeah. And he didn't say anything. He just said, I have to take a nap now, and left. Meaning to me, he didn't know. He just didn't like the idea of one of the possible candidates being a porno photographer in the most bourgeois, genteel Jewish family in Copenhagen, where he was raised. So that's another sort of thing coming out after the book. Who was it? Yeah. Well, I don't know, but it's one of the two. Yeah. And that's the best I can do, folks.
Who are you rooting for, Larry?
What?
Who are you rooting for?
Among the pornos guys?
Which one? The nice guy or the naughty guy?
I'm thinking it's the porno photographer.
All right.
And the reason is there was a period where Erickson was extremely unhappy living in Copenhagen as a young kid, and wanting to break into a different milieu, less bourgeois, less repressed, and so forth. That leads me to the sense it was the porno photographer, because I think he ran around covertly in a few of those circles. But it's a guess. The other's a family, does portraits for Jewish families in Copenhagen, a straight shooter everyone is proud of. And I don't think so, but it's a wild guess. And unfortunately, Erickson couldn't tell me. His daughter couldn't tell me. Joan Erickson couldn't tell me. Yeah. So I think maybe we're going to have to leave that to maybe some future investigator who knows Danish and German. I think there's an answer there. I sense the porno photographer, but that's a world that none of us are very familiar with. Okay. The Eric in Psychohistory. I first heard of him, like most of you did, with his book in '58, Young Man Luther, which gave us a model for looking historically and psychologically at, and largely through a biographical perspective. And I was taken by the book, and then I read everything else he had written, and decided at that point I was going to go to Cambridge take a year on leave and see what I can do with him. And Bob Lifton was always very close to Erickson, urged me on and said, maybe you could talk about the ultimate answer to your question at Wellfleet, the annual meeting. And that occurred for 41 years. But I'll never forget one conversation with him, the old man on Trowbridge Street. And I told him, Eric, I started with Luther. I think I've read every biographical book and most of the others you've done. I've read your archives, public and private. And I have a question. What the hell do you call yourself an historian? And above all, what the hell do others, how far do they go in calling you a psychohistorian? And he did answer that one. He said he didn't know either. He wasn't comfortable with any of those labels. And he saw himself as an artist and a clinician and thinking visually. He did that least valuable of all in his scholarship. He rarely got into it, but he got into it when he wrote about his patients. And there's a huge array of data at the Austin Riggs Center in Stockbridge on Eric, the clinician. And what do they have in common? One, he's a damn good therapist, whether you call him psychohistorian or not. And he took impossible cases, as they still do at Riggs, and he turned many around. One of those patients found me at Riggs. He was the, I'm not sure what the label it is, but he was the man who came out of a deep depression because he learned to sing and also to be a photographer. And that man lived until a couple of years ago and ran a photography studio right across the street from Austin Riggs and was a friend of Eric's. So back to the visual as central to the guy, and the concern about the text, whether any kind of text, psychohistory, what have you, was secondary. And maybe that's why he was so damn successful in the records of what he did as a clinician. This guy became ultimately as the character, the seminarian. And what did he do to avoid full-on depression? Well, he found his voice. He sang and he proceeded along artistic lines. And he was about 95 then, but he was really sharp and interesting. And I had some discussions with the seminarian. And he concurred Eric was visual above all. He said, the auditory is fairly important too. And that one goes astray just looking at print and calling it psychohistory. And that is somewhat valid, but that's in essence, I think he felt, and the seminarian felt, was a reductionist perspective. So that's about all I have on Erickson. Just one story. I was teaching at that time at Harvard, and the issue there was getting his records, his personnel records. Harvard had a ban on all kinds of hassles you had to get to get someone's faculty records. And is because of a stuck-up dean who dug us into the Vietnam War, McGeorge Bundy. He was the dean of the college then. And I told him the obvious. And he said, let me give you a story about this. This is Mac Bundy. He said, when Erikson was considered, he was not a choice. The faculty just rejected him as a non-scholar, not important. Luther, Gandhi's book, etc., were not important. That's how the faculty regarded him. And the first choice was Barry and Moore, and Erikson didn't even make the final list in the hire. And I said, so how come he lasted here? And Bundy said he not only lasted, he was probably the best damn teacher Harvard ever had, because he was the most unusual teacher. He thought with his eyes and ears, not his pen. And then he said, and of course, I've already taken care of the file. You've got it. We're going to make you a copy of it. And then I am leaving the door. This is again the Vietnam War is starting up. It's the disaster it always was. And I said to Bundy, I thought you were a son of a bitch. I still think that for your public career in this damn war. However, I think you did a good thing in hiring Erikson. I said, you may have done the best thing in your life in hiring him. And Bundy agreed. He had one virtue. He saw what Erikson was about. Let me go on to a few other things, but the odd thing with the Erikson book is not only did I get in touch with his patients, his colleagues, I really felt for a while connected to that Erikson family. Kai Erikson was a great scholar, but Kai is also a pretty good guy. And what does Kai do after Erik dies? He puts together a book on Erik's paintings and sketches and photographs and all of that. And the point again is this guy thinks visually. That book is private, but you can get it if you bug Kai. So that was an exciting venture on the project. Do I have enough time to get to one or two of the other people? Paul?
I think we can go 5 more minutes.
Okay. Let me state that I think in this discussion and in most discussions, Karl Menninger is de-emphasized. That Karl Menninger is not known as a great psychohistorian. He is not known as much of a probing psychoanalytics theorist, even though he was the most orthodox, more orthodox than Fromm or Erikson. And it took me a while to figure out what this Karl Menninger was. I'm there at the foundation, introduced to Karl Menninger in his office, and fearing the worst, he starts walking over to his bookshelves and starts pulling a few out. War and Peace, Moby Dick, etc. And I said, yeah, I've read them. Well, is there anything here you haven't read? I said, I'd probably be lying to say I've read them all, but I've read most of them. He said, now what we're going to do is we're going to start a club. We're going to call each other, because we're both all-night readers, late in the night, and we're going to read, of all things, the Brothers Karamazov, like the Brothers Menninger. And we did that for as long as I knew Karl Menninger. We had that late night call. and about what we were reading at the time. One other thing that I'd like to bring out on Carl Menninger was a commencement at Bowling Green some years ago. Again, right in the latter part of the Vietnam War, where things were going bad and Lyndon Johnson hadn't seen the big picture yet, that they had to get the hell out. But there was a commencement at Bowling Green. I don't know, Mark, were you at that one where he spoke? No? He gave the commencement speech in a big football stadium on campus. It was in June, it was hot. Everyone is worried whether this old man, who was, I think, 91 at the time, could hold on, could say anything. And they brought in to watch, they brought in the medics, doctors, whatever, if in case something should happen. And none of that happened. The guy started out very meekly, and then the voice got stronger and stronger. And it turned out that the presentation was a diatribe against the war in Vietnam and against going into terrible wars like this. And then he ended the talk at commencement, full stadium, with the remark that Dr. Friedman and I are going to take a plane to DC this afternoon and participate in an anti-war rally. And he said he would contribute to any student in the stadium who would go with us that day. And 8 or 9 did. And the most exciting was after the commencement, all these parents of graduates are mulling around talking to him. And I wonder, where the hell does he know all these people? They're from Ohio and Illinois. They're not from Kansas. And then it clicked. They were the patients he had in Kansas, with kids going to the university there. And all of them had a story, not of the psychohistorian or this or that, but the person who put their lives together, like the seminarian's case. So we're flying out to DC to help get the US out of the damned war. And I'm learning that this guy fills up a football stadium of parents who had connected to Menninger. That's something neither Fromm nor Erickson himself had that Menninger did. An appeal beyond books, beyond learning, to helping people, period. And troubled people, but just helping people. He, in other words, he was a clinician all his life. One thing I do remember on this front, on that same day as the commencement at Bowling Green, there's my daughter, who's about 12 or so at the time, wants to become a professional guitarist, and she's at a lesson. And Carl Menninger was staying at our place. His wife was at our place. And I said, I've got to go pick up my daughter, Beth. The lesson's over. And Carl gets up and says, I'm coming with you, whether you like it or not. And he came. I brought her out from the lesson place. He sat moved himself to the back seat, and she was to sit in the front. And he said to her, Beth, I hear you're a damn good guitarist. Can you play a little for me? And she said, Dr. Carl, I don't think so. I think I've had it for the day. So will you try a little for me? I came out from Kansas to hear this. And she, from that point on, became a Carl Menninger fan. In other words, he did something. The books are not great books. They're problematic. A lot of them are caught in orthodox Freudian theory. But as a human being and a clinician, he was tops, just tops. And as an activist in his life, he was on the top.
Hello, everyone. I had just written a brief kind of note on reflecting on Howard's work for over 40 years, and I've known him since 1980, and the early years of the International Society of Political Psychology. Howard back then was doing his work on that was really related to ethnicity. And he was also starting to do some work on organization. So I want to refer to that. I'll read my comments here for you. Howard Stein's career in medical and psychoanalytic anthropology and in understanding and changing organizational culture is as substantial as it is inspiring. Our mutual intellectual and academic roots go back to the beginnings of the International Society of Political Psychology and the International Society for the Psychoanalytic Study of Organizations. The former, ISPP, where I served on the steering committee in the early 1980s, and the latter, ISPSO, which I co-founded and eventually led as president. By the mid to late 1980s, I was familiar with most of Howard's written work. I invited him to present a paper at ISPSO in New York City. Howard's historical and observational considerations were focused on the application of psychoanalytic and psychological organizational culture. Eventually, his writing would concentrate on the practice of consulting to organizations. His ideas and deeper understandings were derived from fieldwork and storytelling. His approach would reflect on an ethnographic treatment of organizational culture through a psychohistorical and psychodynamic lens. Howard was really unique in that endeavor. In my brief comments here, I wish to call attention to his valuable concept of listening deeply. Many people that I know that have read a lot of Howard refer to this book and refer to this concept often. It really deserves prominence, I think, in talking about it, the body of his work, which is enormous, by the way. His attentiveness to historical and observational data, along with his personal experience, empathy, and self-awareness, advances any serious endeavor to understand complex organizations more deeply. Stein's work, including his work with Seth Alcorn, demonstrates analytic and consultative skills and a capacity to facilitate development and problem solving. Stein's organizational work attends to psychological reality, where Howard stresses the humanity of organizational life. It's my hope that my words at least convey my admiration for Howard. His brilliance and his contributions to psychohistory, psychoanalysis, group and organizational psychodynamics. Howard's, it's hard to really summarize the breadth and scope of Howard's work, given that he has affected so many people that I don't think he fully appreciates. His more recent work that combines storytelling and poetry is quite extraordinary and really gets at, for me, the idea that, good analysis of organizations has to take place in those settings where the analyst or the consultant uses these concepts such as listening deeply and the notion of reparation to really sort out and understand and then be able to help organizations. So for Howard, I think his applied dimension of anthropology and his applied dimensions of psychoanalysis and psychology to organizations has been very important. This is the part of of his career that I'm more deeply connected to. For many years, Howard, while I was at the University of Missouri in Columbia, I had a research center that studied organizational psychodynamics. We would have meetings, annual meetings. Howard attended those annual meetings and was always a central figure in terms of what he had to say and what he wanted to present to us. New ideas came naturally to Howard. He did not base his career on hanging his hat on any one ideology or belief system. He was really open-minded to new approaches in looking at organizations psychodynamically. And I value that tremendously. I want to congratulate Howard on receiving this recognition and certainly this enormous and well-deserved recognition. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. This is an overwhelming moment for me in my life as a psychohistorian, as a quadrupedal human being. I'm grateful for the whole field of psychohistory. And every time I've come to New York, thank you. Every time I've come to New York for the IPA, it was a pilgrimage and a homecoming. And I felt welcome that I could actually think. I could actually speak. I was not afraid. There's gobs of criticism, but I always felt emotionally safe. My comments go around the phrase lifetime achievement. Those of you who know me know that I take words very seriously. And so what made me think, well, what are my lifetime achievements as I see them, as I feel of them today? Because I, like everybody else, am not immutable. I change my mind. I might, if I tell you in a week from now what I think my lifetime achievements are, I might disagree with myself. And that's what the essence, I think, of psychohistory and of every kind of good thinking, research, scholarship, poetry, music are. When people get honored for lifetime achievements, it usually is about stuff. And if you don't know George Carlin's comedy routine about stuff, you owe it to yourself, because this is such a brilliant, trenchant condemnation of this infinite accumulation. Well, in psychohistory and other academia, we have stuff. What's the stuff of my achievements? Books, articles, essays, book reviews, chapters, all of them authored, co-authored, editing. A lot of people told me over my life that, for you, Howard, PhD really does mean pile higher and deeper. And I don't deny these as contributions. And as an aside, those of you who know me know that I never know what I'm going to, quote, contribute next, because I don't know what I'm going to think about next. I work in a whole bunch of different, quote, fields or disciplines, and they exist to a lot of people in them for whom their boundaries almost like Donald Trump's wall. But for me, this integrative force it's impossible to avoid. And this brings me to a very different way of looking at what I think my lifetime achievement is. And it's not simply a pile of stuff called a curriculum vitae, which those people who think they're giving me a compliment and are quite detractors because they haven't read anything in it and say, Howard, we measure your CV by how much it weighs rather than what it contains. You know, that's funny. But have you read anything? Have you listened deeply to what I'm trying to understand? There's a poem by Emily Dickinson, number 1263. One line and the title, Tell All the Truth, but tell it slant. So many of us, including in academic fields, in business, in politics, are on a straight line, a horizontal line. We have mission statements and goals and objectives and visions and strategic plans. We know the end before we start. I have in everything I do in life, I think, I have no idea what the end is until I get there. And then I'll say, oh, this is where I was going. Seth Alcorn and Michael Diamond and I have worked together for 30 some years. And just about everything we do, we kind of have an idea of a concept. Let's say organizational silos, which I don't know who first thought of it in the late 80s or 90s. And we were muddling around and eventually wrote some papers about it. But what was the inspiration, I think? And God only knows, Michael is as good an ethnographer as I ever could be. Where'd the concept come from? He would be talking with people in organizations to describe what's it like to live here, what's it like to work here. And non-verbally, what would people do? They would do this. They would do this. And anybody who knows the North American Great Plains knows about grain elevators for human food, for silage, for domesticated animals. And that's where silos comes from. And then the boundaries between silos and organizational, just lots of vertical ones, either in the same city or now in transnational corporations. So silos and ideas like that came from applied work. My guess is that for Michael, for Seth, certainly for Shelley, for Molly, applied has always come first. You're in the process of doing something with people, trying to understand, trying to solve, trying to something. And then comes something like research that gives a formal name to it. And eventually you get hypothesis and theory and all of that. But to me, it always starts with thinking and working and telling as if life were and truth were kind of slant rather than straight and horizontal. Slant does not mean this psychopathic trickery, but there's always different ways of knowing, different ways of understanding. Just as I didn't set out to be a psychohistorian, I don't think I set out to be a poet. I learned a lot from seeing everything as a slant, as looking a different way, or maybe a different metaphor would be, consider a construction site. A construction site is not made up of one surveyor, but you define a point in space by having all these surveyors coming at it from different ways. So poetry is one, and David Beisel's beloved jazz is another one. And I think Michael Diamond's also, because he loves jazz. And there are these so many ways, so many slants. But the slants even are not just individual. When you give me a Lifetime Achievement Award, this lifetime called Howard Stein would not exist without you. All these piles of accomplishments, achievements would not exist without you. I learn as much from and with you as you ever do from me. And no, it's not a circle. It is a upward virtuous spiral where ultimately I have no idea where the ideas came from. We're all supposed to be such original thinkers. Listen, even listening deeply was not original for me. My relationship with my father was as rife with ambiguity and ambivalence and love and hate as I can imagine anyone. One place that I hold so dear is with my dad as a musician, as a violinist. We would listen to classical music a lot of time, and we'd sit down with a score, a Beethoven symphony, a string quartet, whatever. And my dad, a violinist, would always say to me, son, a word I didn't appreciate, but son, anybody can ferret out the tune, the main theme. In order to know what the symphony, the quartet, the whatever it is about, you have to look all the way up from the double basses to the flutes and the piccolos. That's, you have to, the melody, the tune, the obvious presenting complaint that somebody brings to you, an organizational consultant. Okay, Shelley, Michael, this is our problem. We want you to help us solve it. I mean, you don't say to them, all right, that's a bunch of bullshit. Well, what you say is, in your head, this is a starting point. And as you tell stories, as they tell stories, they lead you in this serpentine way of listening deeply, and you're making comments and they're making comments to your comments, that it takes you somewhere beyond the melody, that you start to get a sense of the organization. You start to get the sense of the age of Trump. You start to get the sense of Jimmy Carter. you start to get a sense of the age of Reagan or the age of Trump by looking at the whole score. And of course, when I look at a page or I'm mimicking a page, a score is a cross-section of time, of what is the time, what unfolds over time, how does the unconscious reveal itself over time. So lo and behold, what do I come to? This lifetime achievement of Howard Stein is inseparable from my lifetime with psychohistorians, IPA, IPHA, Psychohistory Forum, Clio, Journal of Psychohistory, Journal of Psychoanalytic Anthropology, Family Systems Medicine, Family Medicine, and just all these zillions fields, which are all people. I would not be here where I am today were it not working with some of the finest editors I could imagine. After writing, I wrote one article for Joseph Epstein of the American Scholar a long time ago. And it ended up being called Portrait of a Young Physician. I wrote essay after essay after essay, scholarly footnote. Joe liked them. He thought I was getting somewhere. He got very frustrated at one point and said, Howard, why don't you sit down and just write a story? It was like God saying, let there be light. Because a story just took off. And I had a draft of something to him, a piece of fiction based on my lifetime in medical settings. And with some editing and a little bit of juggling around, he said, you got it, this is it. And so telling it slant, the lifetime of achievements is not this monad called Howard Stein sitting out on some desert island with a lot of CDs and LPs of classical music. You, in so many fields and ordinary non-academic people are part of everything that I say, are part of every poem that I write. Relationship. We psychodynamic people who deal with unconscious, we call it intersubjectivity, unconscious to unconscious. Rainer Maria Rilke, the poet, talked about the behind the visible, or as he called God, the beyond in the midst. And that brings me to a compliment of all compliments I've gotten in psychohistory from Ken Fuchsman many years ago. Howard, you're the Renaissance man of psychohistory. It's not just that I was speechless, but I understood from him, who I respect as a scholar, as a psychohistorian, as a very serious and very funny guy. Okay, that's my role, that's my place. And then I thought, well, there's Leonardo, there's Da Vinci. And then I got to thinking, and I never said this, Ken, thank you. It is one of the most wonderful gifts anybody's ever given me, because I do work in a jillion fields and I never know where I'm begging, borrowing, stealing from, or where even I'm going. But I have to take it further. Without the Renaissance, there wouldn't be any Renaissance men. any Renaissance women today. I cannot tell you how many ideas you all each and as a group, when I'm at the what used to be IPA, now PHA, and in 20 years it'll be something else. I never leave the same Howard Stein with the same ideas. I'm percolating like the old coffee pots or champagne that you don't even have to open the bottle. The bubbling fires the cork. So here's Howard Stein, the Renaissance man, who without the Renaissance, without you, without ISPSO, especially the days of Harry Levinson, all ISPSOs aren't alike either. The ISPSO you introduced me to, where I met Shelley, and I mean, I fell in love with her thinking, her working, her way of doing everything, including in the most recent years, a column having to do with tea. What on earth does tea have to do with psychohistory or organizational consulting? On the surface, nothing. But if you can't see the tea in all of it, you don't get it. You don't get it at all. And if you don't hear the music, the whole score, the whole scores from beginning to end, in listening deeply and in whatever I write in psychohistory, you don't get it. Now, psychohistorians, like every other human being, have been given to ideology. One model fits all. And I'm not going to name names. Yes, I will. I'll name Howard Stein. Once upon a time in psychoanalytic anthropology, it was George Devereux and Weston LeBar and Milford Spiro, and it still is, but it's more and more and more and more. And I don't know where it all, I don't know where it all ends. The inclusiveness continues. So the Renaissance man, the Renaissance psychohistorian owes this me. I owe so much of what I write and how I think to you. So should I say, well, now, is this all yours and I'm only the scribe? Well, sometimes it is. But my ideas are not just my ideas. Years ago, when David Beisel was honoring me at a luncheon, he mentioned something that I never would have imagined, that all his work on the family dynamics of World War II had something to do with the conversation he and I had a zillion years ago, when I was talking about how excited I was about psychodynamically based family systems thinking and family therapy. And the extrapolation, not wild analysis, but quite literally, the unconscious dynamics of the family of nations. And my God, where he took that year upon year upon year, country upon country upon country, he would show how all the members of the family contributed to the war. I would like to end with two poems. Paul asked me to read a poem, and I'm going to read one that I recently wrote on the subject of fear and anxiety in our age of anxiety and dread. I'm sure everybody knows Edvard Munch's famous, devastating painting called The Scream, of this skeletal person walking on a bridge or on a cliff next to a precipice. And I wrote a poem called Edvard Munch's Scream and Ours. A wonderful poet and editor, Lynn Eastland, who has now died, who is a great poet and a wonderful editor of mine, introduced me to the concept of ekphrastic poems. And these are poems based on other works of art. Let's say Edward Hopper's Nighthawks. She wrote a couple of poems on that. So this one is on Edvard Munch's Scream. I thought it was a painting hanging in an art museum, and I a visitor. But I am on no promenade among pictures at an exhibition. I do not gaze upon the surface of Edvard Munch's canvas. I enter the world through it. I recognize I live there. I see its woe, I hear its cry. I am the painting, I am the painter. Out for my evening walk along a path near a steep cliff's edge, my eyes transfixed westward by a setting sun, drowning in a blood-red sky. All earth screams as it burns alive. Terror seals my vocal cords. I shriek, but am mute. Our earth is the stake upon which we incinerate ourselves and take the whole world along with us. What will I look like to passers-by as they stare into my agonized face? Do they know I am already my own skeleton, my own ghost? All nature weeps at our rampage. We wail for the grief our final sunset brings. And I submit things to various journals, and I bite my nails down to whatever you bite your nails down to as I await a decision. I want to end with a poem that I will ask your forgiveness in advance if I just can't read it all the way through. Because this is the summary of summaries of what I hope my lifetime achievement is, what I hope psychohistory's lifetime achievement is as an applied field, as a scholarly field. It's a poem, part of a much larger poem by John Donne. No man is an island, no woman is an island, entire of itself. Each is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thine own or of thine friends were. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind, in humankind. Therefore, sin not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. That's our lifetime achievement. And that's our lifetime calling as psychohistorians. Thank you.
Jacques Szaluta is one of the few psychohistorians who has a doctorate in history and who is a practicing psychoanalyst. When I was brand new to psychohistory, Paul Elovitz recommended two books to me, one of which was Jacques Psychohistory, Theory, and Practice. Szaluta has also written on Marshall Pétain, Sigmund Freud's ego ideals, psychoanalysis and the humanities, Steven Spielberg films. He paints on a wide intellectual canvas. For decades, he was a history professor at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy on Long Island. Dr. Saluta's long and winding road to these lifetime achievements began with a childhood trauma. When he was a 6-year-old boy living in his native Paris, the Germans conquered the city. France was no longer a safe haven for any Jew, but where could a Jewish child be secure under Nazi rule? His mother and he left Paris and sought refuge in a variety of locales. Finally, his determined mother arranged for him to cross the border into Switzerland. She was able to get her precious son out of France, but not herself. Jack's father was arrested and succumbed to death in Auschwitz. His mother, too, was later imprisoned in that horrific camp and barely survived the war. Meanwhile, young Jacques Szaluta was a displaced child living with a Swiss family. He was far removed from the threats to any Jew in Hitler's France. He took to education, and his excellent writing was singled out in school. When the Germans were defeated, life in France was still uncertain. Jacques was 12. His family sent him by himself to New York to live with his aunt. He was still displaced. After graduating high school, he entered the U.S. Army. His advanced specialty was military police. As an MP, Szaluta was sent to Germany in the early 1950s. He was fluent in English, German, and French, and this was useful to the American Army. The recognition brought to him was appreciated. This led to something dawning on him. As Szaluta describes it, quote, "I had a eureka moment as I suddenly felt that after I left the Army, I would study to become a high school teacher and later on do what had occurred to me, which had become unconscious to me at first. I thought I would become a historian and perhaps write history." On being discharged from the Army, he entered New York University. After earning his bachelor's degree in 1959, he was accepted into graduate school in history at prestigious Columbia University, which at the time had about the most distinguished history department in the United States. He did his dissertation on Marshal Pétain, the wartime ruler of France under Nazi occupation. Saluta's dissertation advisor was Rudolf Benyon. Dr. Benyon, of course, became a highly influential scholar in many specialties, including psychohistory, and he was to play an important part throughout Saluta's career. When Jacques was a freshly minted doctorate, he was looking for a history faculty position in the greater New York area. One of the places he applied was the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. There were a number of qualified applicants, but one thing that gave Szaluta a step up was the letter of recommendation written by Richard Hofstadter, the most highly regarded American historian at the time. Once established at the Merchant Marine Academy, Dr. Szaluta remained there for the entirety of his academic career. His teaching was so acclaimed that the school's administration employed him to assist other faculty in improving their own instruction. Upon his retirement as a full professor, he was an advisor to the student newspaper and retained an office on campus. To this day, Szaluta regularly attends events at the academy. Just because he had a secure full-time faculty position does not mean that Szaluta was finished with his professional development. He decided to become a psychoanalyst and received training at the New York Center for Psychoanalytic Training, which was founded and directed by Dr. Reuben Fine. Jacques has combined his interest in Freud and analysis with his historical expertise, and from early on has participated in the International Psychohistorical Association and contributed often to both Clio Psyche, the Journal of Psychohistory, and other publications. In the early 1980s, a fortunate break came his way. His former professor, Rudy Binion, had been asked to write a book in French introducing psychohistory. He passed the request on to Jacques, who took it up. Saluta's French language book came out in 1987. 16,000 copies were printed and sold out, and led to a second edition in about 1991. It was so popular, it was sold in Paris department stores. Later, he wrote an English version, which Peter Lang published in 2001 and is still in print. As an expansion and follow-up on this endeavor, Szaluta became interested in writing about Sigmund Freud's ego ideals, for which he has written articles and presented papers at conferences. He is also a discerning psychohistorical film critic, as well as a mentor and close reader of texts. He and I would meet regularly at a restaurant in the bowels of Penn Station in Manhattan. He would take the Long Island Railroad in from Westbury. I would drive in from Northwest Connecticut. Much of our hours there would be his meticulously going over a paper or so I had written. Hardly anyone reads as closely as Dr. Szaluta. Paul Elovitz had been trying to get Jacques to consent to do a scholar's interview for Clio Psyche. Jacques resisted, as he did not wish to have something published about his childhood ordeals. The only people he confided in basically were his wife, Susan, and his younger daughter, Elizabeth. But in a phone call between Paul, Jacques, and myself, he consented. After he composed his responses, he sent me a draft, and we met at a diner in Westbury to eat and discuss his interview. He opened up about his traumas, and both of us were close to tears. A few more times in his home, we also discussed his childhood and his personal and career development. The interview was published in Clio Psyche, and he gave an account of it at the 2019 Psychohistory Conference. It was moving to many. Dr. Jacques Szaluta has come a long way from the time he was a young Jewish boy displaced from his family by Hitler's military conquests. A cheer for Jacques for not only receiving this Lifetime Achievement Award, but for what he has made of his life after the hardships of his childhood. In just a few months, it will be 83 years since the Germans conquered Paris. In 5 months and 4 days, Szaluta will celebrate his 90th birthday. Jacques, congratulations on a well-deserved Lifetime Achievement Award.
I would like to thank everyone for this outstanding award. An honor. Ken, I am astounded at how you wrote about my career in such detail and so thoughtfully. Thank you for all of the work that you did to make this special day happen. I am honored to receive this award, and I am most pleased to have had the opportunity and great fortune to work with all of you over decades. A heartfelt thank you and cheers.
Hello, so I will talk about Dan Dervin, but I don't know Dan Dervin, unfortunately. But I will read what Paul compiled for us. So Professor Daniel Dervin spent most of his career in the University of Mary Washington. He was born in Nebraska in 1935, educated in Creighton University, 1959, Omaha, and Columbia University, 1970, where he took his doctoral degree in English drama and comparative literature. His honors MA thesis was on Tennessee Williams. He won the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship and subsequently various prestigious literary prizes. Dr. Dervin spent most of his career teaching literature from psychoanalytic and psychological perspective at the University of Mary Washington in Virginia. He published numerous books on applied psychoanalysis and psychohistory, presenting regularly at the International Psychohistorical Association, now IPHA. After retirement from teaching, he rented office space in Fredericksburg so he could continue to write and publish without the interruptions of home life. In terms of journals, Professor Dervin published in American Imago, Bulletin of Manager Clinic, Clear Psyche, Journal of Psychohistory, Psychocultural Review, Psychoanalytic Review, and the Psychoanalytic Study of Society, as well as elsewhere. In Clear Psyche, he wrote a symposium paper on the history of childhood. Dr. Dervin was also active in the theater and has been a lifelong published poet. For example, 1998, 1999, several of his poems were anthologized in 2 collections by Columbia Publications. Some of his books include Bernard Shaw, A Psychological Study, A Strange Sapiens, A Psychoanalytic Study of Creativity, D.H. Lawrence, Through a Freudian Lens Deeply, A Psychoanalysis of Cinema, Creativity and Culture, A Psychoanalytic Study of the Creative Process in the Arts, Sciences, and Culture, Enactments, American Models of Psychohistorical and Psychohistorical Models, Matricentric Narratives, Restoring Agency to Women's Writing. Home is Another Country, a collection of stories. Father Bassetti in America, a biographical study. The Digital Child, The Evolution of Inwardness in the Histories. So just 1 second. So about his book on enactments, that's what it was written. Enactments introduces readers to the field of psychohistory and examines the continuous interplay of psychoanalytic process with the irrational forces that shape history, and systematizes a highly diverse field to 6 usable models. About his digital child was written that in the digital child, Dervin traces the evolution of how we have perceived childhood in the West, and that's what we have meant by inwardness from prehistory to today. He defines 6 transformational stages: tribal, pedagogical, religious, humanist, rational, and citizen, leading up to new stage, the digital child. This shape has emerged from current, unprecedented, and pervasive technological culture. Dervin delves deeply into each stage that precedes today's, studying myths, literary text, visual arts, cultural histories, media reports, and the traditions of parenting, pediatrics, and pedagogy. Weaving together approaches from biology, culture, and psychology, Dervin revisits who we once were as a species in order to enable us to grasp who we are becoming and where we might be heading, for better or worse. So that's all I have to say. And Paul, podium is yours.
I'll add a few things more about Dan Dervin. He's one of a number of people who trained in literature and taught literature and who use psychoanalytic insights and did a wonderful job. I'm not finding a group like that. Most have either died or their health doesn't allow them, as Dan's health doesn't allow him to be here at this point. He was a major force in the International Psychohistorical Association, willing to delve in and do the research to make broad generalizations and do it very well. As his hearing declined, his ability to attend lessened, but he continued to write important papers, various symposia that you will find in Clio Psyche. In that case, I'll go to Herbert Barry III, who will be 93. I usually got to wish Herb happy birthday at his the International Psychohistorical Association's meetings until COVID resulted in his not being able to come and to them. He was educated at Harvard and Yale, and indeed he would earn his doctoral degree at age 27 at Yale. He taught at my alma mater, University of Connecticut, prior to serving as a research professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Pharmacy for 38 years, while also teaching in the psychology department. Professor Barry published extensively on the president's events, focusing especially on birth order, longevity, first names that induce special affiliations with their fathers or mothers, and slogans, associated with their presidencies. For over 20 years, he served as co-director of the Psychohistory Forum's research group on childhood personality and psychology of presidents and presidential candidates. He regularly flew to New York to present at the Psychohistory Forum, as well as the International Psychohistorical Association on presidential candidates and elections. In that regard, he was also a very firm Democrat, which meant that he lost more than one bet that he had with me, since he was usually assured that the Democratic candidate would win. And while they lost in cases, they also got more votes than their Republican competitor. I'm not saying I voted for the Republican competitor, because in none of those cases did I. I listed in our forum some of the major activities of his life, though they don't begin to capture his contributions to scholarship. He loved writing for the Mensa Society that he had been an early member of, and he loved publishing. As a matter of fact, he inspired me to start listing my publications because I thought, oh, that's a good idea. And he had enormous fortitude in his scholarship. Our last issue of on the psychology of music and musicians was really inspired by Herb, who was not at the point when he could easily write with great facility, but he wrote about his musical preferences. And I said, though we've had a few articles on this, we are going to really do music. And in fact, we ended up with a two-part psychoanalysis, psychology of music series that that had some major contributions from our earlier honoree, Howard Stein. It's been a pleasure to work with Howard, with Howard also, of course, but with Herb. And I'm sorry that his hearing and vision doesn't allow him to be here. And I'm hoping that he will continue to have a long life and continue to inspire others by his example of commitment to scholarship and teaching, as well as by what he's written.